Hey, thanks everybody for joining us. This session's a complement to a lot of the other sessions here, which really focus so much on the all-important cultural and representational issues. This is really to the product. One of the reasons to have diversity in the team is to build a product that's more usable for everybody. So what we've got here is we've got 4 different perspectives on how do you actually approach building your product to have diversity and inclusion in it from the beginning, and what benefits give and what challenges come up as a result. So I'm going to start by asking the panelists to briefly introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Laura Gomez and I'm the founder and CEO of Atypica, and we are a business intelligence solution for talent, so recruiting and human resources.
Hi everybody, can you hear me? Yes. Hi everybody, my name is Andrea Barica. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called O School. We are a shame-free platform for sex and pleasure education, and we're powered by live streaming and live chat. So anyone in the world with a smartphone can get access to the best sex and pleasure education, no matter where they're from, no matter what culture they come from, and be able to own their desire and live a better life. Before that, I was an entrepreneur in residence and venture partner at 500 Startups, and before that, I co-founded Indinero, which is an accounting software. So the other sexy industry, right?
Hi, I'm Jeff Kirschner. I'm the Chief Security Officer at...
Hey Jeff, I'm gonna just, here.
Is that better?
Yes, better.
I'm Jeff Kirschner. I'm the Chief Security Officer at a company called Medallia. Medallia makes a customer experience management platform, so helping businesses get closer to their customers. So obviously on our platform, it's very important that we understand how our customers are using it and how they're using different practices to pull in that information. And we use our own product internally too to reach out to our workforce to understand the different needs and the different opinions and viewpoints that they can bring in to develop our product.
Hi there, my name is Willie King. I want to turn it up. Is this working? Hello, testing. Can you hear me? Hello? Okay. Okay, all right, hello. My name is Willie King, and I'm the Chief Technical Officer for Communication Services for the Deaf, or CSD. And we are a nationwide and worldwide nonprofit organization that serves the deaf and hard of hearing communities. We were founded 42 years ago from a broom closet, and to now we've evolved to a virtual company. And the reason we are here is while deaf people will never change, how we communicate will always continue to change based on technology that is available out there. And it's important to make sure that we include all of us on the evolutionary platforms.
Thanks very much. And I'm John Pincus. I consult for various companies, including O School, looking at the intersection of software and diversity, really from the technical perspective. So, let's jump right in with an example in your various products. What's an example of things that you've done to embed diversity or inclusion in your product?
So we are a data company, and so our data sets, usually people randomize data sets to reflect whatever they're studying or looking at. So for us to randomize diversity in tech, we would then have to be highly skewed towards a male-oriented data set of resumes. So we decided not to do that. We decided to actually go ahead and at least make it gender equal in our data training sets. So every time that the data is training on the resumes, they're not skewed towards a particular gender. That's one of the things that we did early on. On the product side, for example, we can change, we had labels that said female, male, and a client of ours wanted men and women instead because it didn't want the labels to be around identity, but rather attributes. So we do a lot of that. We can change our terminology. We try to be very inclusive of our data and training sets. And so it's always in our mind to not skew or even our own machine learning towards biases.
I mean, I think this is just a hugely important thing with machine learning in general, to make sure that the data set, by default, it's going to absorb whatever the current and historical biases are. So you really need to look at it with a critical eye. It's a great point. Andrea?
Yeah, so in my product, we build a live streaming platform for a lot of different communities, and I would say in our product, the way that diversity is shown up in the DNA can be kind of summed up in like 3 ways that we built the product. One is just basic information architecture, right? And so, for example, there's many different types of sex and pleasure education that many people want to access, but we really thought hard about how we organize the information so not to, for example, throw all the LGBTQ people in like an afterthought subcategory that you could like come later on. And so we thought a lot about how we like right in the get-go or organize information on the site, and so that a lot of different communities aren't, you know, again, like sub or other, and that kind of presupposes a real cultural like statement about what is, you know, an other or a subcategory in a community like ours. So that's one way. The second way is that we teach consent literally. So we teach everybody that your body is your body, and you know, this is something that we teach as educators on OSchool, and so we want to make sure the product also does that. So we have content warnings for various things. We try to build consent and think about how can we build a consent culture in a product, because we want humans to not touch each other without consent as well, and so why shouldn't we also use our product to teach people? So that's one way. And then the third way is, you can imagine that there are so many online platforms today where abuse and harassment is a massive problem, right? Like, it is very difficult to go on any major platform, especially as a marginalized person, a woman, person of color, queer person, and not be at a high risk of abuse and harassment. And so one of the things that we've done is we've looked at threat modeling from a safety and a security aspect, and we've also thought about how do we build communities and also build in models to then to really go up against the culture on the internet, which is so prone to harassment, especially for the most marginalized. So those are 3 areas where we have worked on incorporating our values and the diversity of our team into the product itself.
Okay, Jeff?
Thank you. I'm going to start with a quick story about how one of our customers is using our product and service. So earlier this year, we launched a program with the Veterans Association, and this is something that I feel pretty personally passionate about. You know, helping veterans assimilate into our workforce, be heard more from their services and needs. Earlier this year, we launched a program with the Veterans Association, and since using our platform, we've been able to help over 100 suicide and homeless attempts be responded to much more quickly than they had been in the past. So literally in the matter of, you know, an hour or 2 versus where it could take up to a week to reach out to those customers and provide a response. And I think what we've learned as a company from that is not only the value of how you can how the different perspectives of people that are joining your workforce can change the way that you're thinking about product, but they can also view the results that our customers are achieving and build different things around different demographic and diversity capabilities within the product itself, and also you know, things even down to things like privacy and how you know, some people like to keep personal information more private. So it makes us think about how we're building that into our product and building better privacy capabilities.
The privacy is a great point, and this must come up from you as well, because it's the kind of thing that we don't necessarily think of as having diversity and inclusion impact, and yet, who does the burden fall on when privacy is violated? Usually people who are vulnerable.
And it's also about giving them the choice.
Right,
too, right?
Giving them the choice, so the opt-in, right.
That's right.
It's great. Lily?
Well, CSD has always been, we've been very proud of the work we've done. We always try to solve the problem of communication, as I mentioned earlier. When you take down the barriers, we're very proud of the work we've done and the product we have, because it is truly accessible by everyone, no matter what, no matter their background, their disability, whether they're a person of color. It has been fully accessible since day one. For example, we have about 3 different platforms that are available and out there today for the community. One of them is called Vinya, and this is very similar to a rideshare app. If you need an interpreter, if you need a car, instead of asking for a car, you ask for an interpreter. And remember the old days in the 1980s? You would have to go through a travel agency to book a plane ticket. So that's the way it feels like today when we're interacting with the interpreting agency. And that is not an inclusive or accessible experience. So Vinya has made it easier for all parties, whether it's an interpreting agency, the interpreter, or the deaf consumer, to make sure that we get interpreters. We're hooked up with 29 different interpreting agencies to make sure interpreters are accessible. This is centralized. We also have CSD Learn and CSD Neighborhood. These are 2 other products that are key for today's communities. You may have heard this sad statistic about unemployment and underemployment in our country. We have a very sad number in the deaf community. And how do we reduce that? How do we solve that problem? We came up with CSD Learns, which is very similar to a webinar and training for deaf people to make sure that they learn and gain skills so they are qualified for employment. And they're qualified for all of the jobs that are out there. Vinya is not here to make deaf people equal. We are here to make deaf people, we're here to recognize deaf persons' value, because we're not equal on day one, no matter what the disability. We want to make sure their value is recognized.
That's great. I'm really struck by, fully accessible since day one. I think this is one of the reasons I really like the title about the DNA of the product, that as you start out, how do you go about getting that not just into the company's mission, but really into the team and how in the process, that how people think about it? Any specific techniques on doing this? Anything that's worked well?
I can start.
Yeah.
I'll give it a technique. I think again, going back to building things from the very start, it makes a big difference. And I think it's really important that the company's mission includes some elements of that, because it's much different, for example, for ADA requirements to go and think of them after the fact and make your website or your products more accessible. But if you're doing that from the beginning, and the message is pretty clear throughout the organization that that's what you're doing, it makes people think about it early. And you can do that with simple elements like training and education and reiterating the message about the value of people's different opinions and how you're going to make that available in your product. But it's not necessarily the silver bullet that's going to solve the problem, but as long as you have the programs that are in place to insert those elements very early on in the product life cycles and in the patterns, then you can build them from scratch. And you can do it in very manual ways. You can do checklist items when you're first thinking about designs and requirements, or you're thinking about this, or you're thinking about that, to remind people about what elements you need to build into your product.
Right. I mean, it's what I sometimes say is approach it like you would any other important attribute of the process and build it into your process. Easier said than done, of course. What are some examples of the challenges that you've had with these? And anybody? Laura?
We wrote a blog post last year around building empathetic algorithms, and empathy is a human emotion. It's something that we feel, and so how can you apply a human emotion to an algorithm? And it's not necessarily applying the emotion itself, but the accountability that comes with empathy. When you're empathetic, you're actually allowing yourself to go outside your own needs to feel or understand other people's circumstances. And that's what we want with our algorithms. We want them to not just think about it. So we see time and time again all of these products that are built by a very stereotypical tech founder or led on the executive team by white males, cisgender white males. And you get to a point where you don't understand why this doesn't make sense to them when it makes sense to us. But that's because, again, as Andrea said, like when you become a marginalized user, then you think about those things when you're building your own product. So I think it is really hard. Like, do I go back and say, did our modeling skew towards a certain demographic group? Are we representing when we give this data? So I onboarded a client yesterday, and there are about over 1,000 employees, but there's about 50,000 permutations of in our product that they can go and look at. This group made it to this stage, everything is patent. But what if we don't give them the right data to empower them internally? And I think about that. Is this going to scale when I have 100 clients, maybe more like Medallia? I don't know. So what are the mechanisms that I can do now while we're still small and as we scale up to make sure that we're empowering, we're giving the right data to those people that really care about diversity and inclusion. Our clients are mostly diversity and inclusion folks. So imagine me giving them, or our product giving them data that is not reflective of what really should be. So we have QA processes, we spot check everything, so we are really, really, really thorough right now. As we continue growing, we hope to actually still have that human element, because not even automation is going to be skewed towards a certain bias as humans as we are.
Right, I mean, it risks being skilled. I think I'm going to, I know you have to take off in a few, so but before that, and before we get on to the rest of the people in that question, what, any advice you'd have for the audience based on your experience as they're trying to build products themselves? I heard you talk about making sure to look at the data sets, keep the human element in the loop. What else?
So I'll give this example. I was an early Twitter employee. I was the head of localization there, so my team was responsible for internationalization and translation. I remember in 2009, a celebrity from outside the United States requested that she didn't read her mentions, especially when they were harassing her. And this is 2009, and I remember kind of putting in the future request and saying, oh, this celebrity is like so fun, like this celebrity doesn't wants everything catered to her and we can't. But I remember putting in that tool request. I remember talking to our general counsel there. And I wish I could go back and say, you know what, this is not just a feature for a celebrity, this is a feature for women, for anyone that's marginalized at Twitter. Do I feel responsible now? And I think it's kind of my atonement, building this inclusive diversity in order to really move forward on the number one learnings is wherever you work, whatever you're doing, just think about what that legacy will be. And so I think definitely, I hope the legacy of Atypica is 1,000 times, if not 1,000,000 times better than the legacy that, the platform that I used to work for will have in the long run.
Thanks very much. So, Andrea, challenges?
We're getting coffee, Laura. I want to talk.
Takeaways.
So I'm building a consumer company, and I'm a startup, so very limited resources. And I think especially, I've been passionate about inclusion in technology since I entered technology in 2010 when I was building accounting software. And I think a challenge of a startup, I don't know if there are any founders or people in startups now, is there's this thing about inclusion is that you want to be inclusive of everyone, but you're a consumer company, so you have to focus. And making the choices about where you need to focus, or else, and this is the truth, and I always try to say this at tech inclusion conferences, no margin, no mission. if you don't, find your product market fit, like you don't even have a mission. You just have to go home and start over. And that's a really hard place to be when you're at heart so like you want to live and die for inclusion and diversity and accessibility. But right now, we have very limited resources. We are a pre-seed and we're going to raise our seed round. And as a consumer company, we have infinite, like who here wants to ever learn about sex and pleasure? It's like a pretty large market of people, right? When I go to investors, they try to convince me that it's not, like we all aren't here because 2 people had intercourse, but actually it's a pretty wide array of people who want the product that I'm building, but we have to choose which people we're building for first, which is extremely difficult. And yes, like do systemic problems seep into your startup? Absolutely, but one thing we did as a startup is we did a code of conduct policy in the first 6 months of the startup. We had 2 people working at my company. We did small things. We did whatever we could do. We did, knowing that we want to make it to the next milestone so we can have more impact and be able to include more people. And if I had to give one message to people who also believe this way, make money so you can be more inclusive. Make more money and you can be more inclusive. But if you don't, if capital, I just feel this because it's a tech inclusion. I've been to many events that it's so important that at the end of the day, no margin, no mission.
I just had that exact same discussion with Stephanie Lemkin of Blendour at the happy hour last night. It's like, to change the industry, the most effective way to change the industry is for companies that prioritize diversity to have breakthrough successes, and then the herd instinct will kick in and everybody will emulate that. Jeff, challenges and lessons. So
I think everybody's heard it be said before, but listen to your companies and listen to your employees. And I'm not just saying that because we sell a platform that enables companies to do that, but one of the big challenges that we have, and I'm sure many companies face, is you have to balance things like changing regulations and changing rules all the time with what your customers actually need. A great example for that right now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with what's going on with global data protection regulations in Europe and Brexit and what that's all going to mean and how companies, including some of our customers, are interpreting that. So if you have the mechanisms to really understand your customers before you just bend over backwards and do whatever it is that they're asking for because they're worried about how they meet regulations, you need to really instill, if you have that culture to create the product based on what your customers are really asking for, you will often find that you are ahead of the game in terms of regulations and the changes that are forthcoming. So having the tools and mechanisms to really understand and study your customers, studying how they're using the product, being able to break it down, not just aggregating things, but being able to break it down into different segments, different groups, different diversity segments, allows you to understand how they're using things differently, and then you can turn around and build things in ways that meet most of the regulations and meet requirements in that kind of way.
That's great, and one of the things we're consistently hearing is that it's listening to your customers. If you've got a diverse customer base and you can listen to them successfully, that builds this right cycle to get things in. This is, on the one hand, it's software engineering 101. On the other hand, it's hard. Yeah. Willie?
Yes, I agree with what everybody has said so far. They make very good points. The challenge is that from my target audience is a little different. I have to make our products and services accessible for them. I have to. That's our initial mission. So that is my target audience. That is my product and services. They're accessible from the get-go. Therefore, they are accessible to the mainstream. Now, what I would like everyone in this room to think about is we should not design because we have to make it accessible. We want to change the framework to make it inclusive for all of us. There could be little simple things that you may not realize. Who needs interpreting services today? Is it me? Or is it everyone else in the room? Or is it both of us? We all need interpreters, not just me. We all need interpreters, and I think we need to accept that. The other challenge is that all of us are unsure what universal design is. What is universal design? What does it mean? When we say our products and services have universal design, does that meet every person in the audience's needs? My advice would be to include the deaf and hard of hearing people as part of your focus groups for A and B testing. And we are more than happy to participate in this testing to provide feedback. If we have some kind of disability, you may think of it of losing some hearing, but you do gain in another area. The deaf and hard of hearing community has valuable insight that could help not just the deaf and hard of hearing community, but the mainstream community as well.
It's a great point. All the diversity work shows that when you involve these different perspectives, and as you say, it's like when you design for everybody up front, you get results that really are better for everybody, that it results in things. There's classic gender-based human-computer interaction work where if you find the gender-related problems and you fix them, wow, people of all genders start liking the software better. And I think the same is true with so many accessibility kinds of things. The kind of design thinking that you need to make it accessible benefits everybody. And it's a really important point about bringing in your focus groups and betas, getting this diverse community, because then you'll hear firsthand from people what the real problems are. See, so we're doing okay on time. I've got an infinite number of questions, but are there any audience questions that would like to take at this point? All right. Okay, hold that thought, come back later. So let's talk about, there's the product aspects of diversity interact with the human and cultural aspects in two ways. One, with the community we were just talking about. Two, also the team. What are the dimensions your team is diverse in? Are there ways you leverage that? And then conversely, no team is going to be diverse in all the dimensions. What do you do to make up for the lacks of diversity?
I can start. So at our team, how we define diversity in a lot of ways, I think it's about lived experiences. It's about different lived experiences. I don't think there's any sort of axes there because there's infinite. For example, when I first joined a tech company in 2010, I was a woman. I was Filipino American. I also came from a low-income family. But the part that actually was the hardest for me first when I joined the tech community was the low-income family. I remember being in a community of founders, and somebody made a joke about McDonald's. And I was like, oh shit, I loved McDonald's growing up. You went to church and you had McDonald's, right? That. So to hear suddenly to be in a group of people where that was suddenly an experience. So I say this because the way I think about diversity is about lived experiences, and I think it's so easy to get into check boxes of I've got one of these, and I've got one of these, and I've got one of these. But if all of them went to the same Ivy League school, and what does that really mean? There's so much more than just boxes to check. It's about, for me, it's whenever a new person joins, it's do they bring lived experiences here that nobody else has? That's a framework that I use, which can get out of this whole diversity checklist framework. Oh, what, you're gay? Yay! One more. I can check off on a list. So I think that's an important thing. And I think the other important thing, in terms of if there's difficulties or challenges, that manage activities. I really wanted to recruit a female CTO, or a woman CTO, or gender diverse CTO for my company, and I was looking and looking, and what I did, for example, was say, okay, I need to have 5 solid no's from qualified people who fit kind of what I'm looking for, and then I'm gonna just like open it up. And that's what I did. And actually though, when my friend Kenny joined us as CTO, who's a cisgendered heterosexual white man, he actually made our team more diverse. We were like all queer women of color. So it was like, wow, like a white dude joined our team and we're more diverse. Like that's kind of great. But having these kinds of things in mind, it really depends. So kind of broaden it out of just boxes.
I think I'm going to go back to helping veterans and folks from the military assimilate into your organization. Again, because this is one that I can relate to mostly. Even in my previous company, it was a small consulting company started by two folks that were in the Army for a long time. Brilliant guys, but they developed a program for getting people that were joining the private sector and helping. We hired them as consultants, and I think the important thing that I learned from that experience, and I see us applying at Medallia, is that you really have to give them the forum to talk to each other and have management that is bought into understanding what their particular challenges are, because they have strengths and weaknesses that are different. Again, using this example of coming from the military, it's very hierarchical. There's a lot of chain of command and control and stuff like that, and sometimes they have trouble adapting to a workforce that has flatter organizations where your voice is able to be inserted into projects and in different opinions and stuff. And you have to help, whereas, so that's the challenge that they have. They're often waiting to be told, what it is they're supposed to be doing versus feeling like they have a voice in how you're actually building things. So really understanding that that's where they're challenged, whereas they may be great at driving projects, driving to get things done, but struggle with that element of how the organizational hierarchy is different in your company. Once you understand that, you can help break down some of those barriers for them. Give them forums where they can speak and where they're able to be more vocal and insert their opinions into things and understand where they can have some better flexibility. But giving them, giving managers who are helping those teams and those individuals a little bit of insight and the forum for them to come and communicate what their challenges are, I think is something that that really helps an organization adapt to, to different viewpoints and different inclusion challenges.
I think it's great advice about getting management brought in, both senior leadership and then up the chain management bought into why we're doing this and how to make people successful, looking at strengths and weaknesses. The same very much applies for coding school graduates. One of the things I was very impressed about O School is doing the first product with design led by a recent boot camp graduate who doesn't necessarily have the experience to work with an engineering team in the way, if you're a designer working with engineering teams, you know these techniques. She doesn't yet know that yet, but surrounding her with the right people, making sure engineering is aware, okay, she doesn't have this experience yet. You can get people much more successful, and that in turn opens up all these skilled people who are getting overlooked by so many companies. The same's completely true on the accessibility side as well. Really?
Yes, absolutely. Some of the challenges that we have faced and we have overcome, I have an example or a story of 3 years ago. My development team was based in Austin, and we had some issues trying to recruit more talent. We then decided to change and move to a virtual experience so we could recruit talent all over the country instead of limiting ourselves to just Austin. So that was one easy fix, because there are a lot of people now working from home. This is not a new experience. Secondly, we're always looking for the best cultural fit. We don't necessarily base things on their talent, but it's talent and culture. We would like to know why they would like to work for CSD. Do they believe in what we're building? And if they do, we know that their work will make an impact in the community we serve. So some of these software developers could work for, any type of company, Facebook, Amazon, Google, but they can make a bigger impact if they work for a small startup company. So that's what we look for. Number one, why would they like to work for us? The beauty of this approach is that all of our business units are deaf consumers. So they are the ones who define the requirements. So that means the software developers, a majority of whom are hearing, instead of looking at the bigger picture, those software developers are considered the minority in our company, because this is a deaf-led and operated company. But we believe in the same mission. We're building this platform together. That's why we decided we needed to recruit people who primarily believed in our product.
So you said an interesting thing about the looking for cultural fit. It's because this is so often that exact same language is used by your stereotypical 20-something bro culture startup to reject everybody who's not a bro startup. And yet when you actively want this kind of positive culture, then you really do want to be working for the people who will fit in it. So I find it just this fascinating inversion of things. So last poll for audience questions. Yeah, in the back there. Do we have a handheld? We have the.
Over here.
We've got somebody coming out. Great.
Hi, I'd like to know your thoughts about remote working as a force to drive inclusion, because Bay Area startups they live in a bubble, and essentially they perpetuate this stereotype of American tech companies providing, expanding the digital imperialism of the United States. And what are your thoughts about whether remote workers, whether from other parts of the U.S. or abroad, could actually further inclusion?
Is that question for
Anybody?
Sure, I'll answer that. That's a great question. Our employees all work remotely, and because of that, we heavily use a product called Slack. So everyone has equal access to the same information, no matter where they are. We used to have a headquarters, and we had people there with a lot of water cooler conversations. But those people who are working remotely will be left out. So that was a problem. So now using Slack, everybody works from home 100%, which means it's more inclusive for the entire workforce. We do have one developer who is consistently traveling all over the world, and he will offset his hours to work for us. We do have current employees in New Zealand, for example. Right now all of our products are in the United States, but we're cloning them to move to other parts of the world in other countries.
Okay.
So Slack helps with that.
Right. I just quickly just to address that. Silicon Valley is not the smartest people in the world. We actually just sucked all the smartest people in the world here because of the piles of venture capital that we have. 100% at 500 Startups, this is one of the main things that we believe, that talent is everywhere. Access to capital is not, especially risk capital for companies. So just to address that, I think a lot of companies in the Silicon Valley are just, they want to reach talent outside the US and everywhere, but in this time in the country, I've had an employee who can't get in the country, like had to work outside the country because of some of the changes based. And so I know that founders really want to expand the borders, and I hope that as a country we do more to expand that. And it's really about getting more investors in other ecosystems, because frankly, I've had so many international companies have to fly to the Silicon Valley and get an office there to get access to the capital. And so I think the ethos of the Silicon Valley is there's talent everywhere, but it's really, especially early stage technology companies, a lot of the funding and the risky capital is here.
It's a great question. Last year at Tech Inclusion, Leslie Miles gave a talk aimed at tech companies, asking them to expand more diversely across the United States. I'll tweet out the link. Many of those arguments apply for supporting a distributed workspace as well, with Willie's great point that you have to be careful not to privilege the people who are at your headquarters. So, alas, we are out of time. This was a great panel. Thanks, everybody. One thing I really want to stress is just the intersectional aspects of all these. We talked about all these different dimensions of diversity very naturally, and they really do all interlock. In terms of the actionable takeaways, which they always stress, there really were a lot here. I'll try to write up a summary and tweet out the link sometime in the next days. So if people have questions, feel free to stick around. Thanks very much.
Thank you.